So good morning, good afternoon, and good night, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, boys and girls, and anybody else on the spectrum. I am Ken Stachnik. I'm a director and cinematographer, and I am here with David Marlowe, and we are here to talk to you about the movies and the stuff that's on Shudder. This is the Shudder Show. David, how you doing today?
I am doing just fantastic. How are you, Ken?
I am fine and dandy like sugar candy. I am fit as a fiddle and ready for love. David, what's the movie that we are talking about today?
Oh, well, it's strange that you might be in such a good mood because we are talking about a nice little doodle from 1986, Street Trash.
1987, actually.
1987. Oh, well,
yes.
Okay, well, there we go. They had a little bit of extra time.
No, indeed. Produced in, I want to believe, let me just double check here.
On IMDb, I could have almost swore that I saw it was 1986.
No, 1984, and then released in 1987. I believe there was a limited release in 1986, but only a handful of theaters because this was a very small independent movie. It didn't really get a lot of attention at the time, but it is a movie that I think that we should be talking about, despite the fact that we should say it has some problematic elements to it.
Troublesome would be a good word to awkward.
Yes,
uncomfortable.
100%. As two white cis men, if the two of us are like, "Oh yikes, this has really got some problems." Holy crap! Does this movie have some problems?
Though there is a scene that almost makes up for it in terms of just the justice served up. In response,
it is a movie that is both ahead and behind its time. That is both. Finding a way to make its problematic elements work, and also maybe don't do so much of that. It's a complicated
also,
film.
I would argue that they created their own sport.
Yes, no, dick tossing. I assume.
Dick tossing is in fact, and like separate from the body. Dick tossing is an activity that takes place in this film. Was I shocked to see this? I wouldn't say shocked is the correct word. More just, oh, okay.
Street Trash is one of those movies that I think is important to talk about because it does something that so few movies do. And that's do something original. And that's something that we just do not see from most movies. And so when a movie does something that I've never seen before, a great example, Cats from last year. I've never seen a movie. It always
comes back to Cats.
Yes, no, absolutely. I've never seen a movie that made me feel like I was having a stroke for 90 straight minutes. But Cats did that. And for that, I've got to say...
And I saw that movie with you, and I didn't recollect dropping acid, but I was like, well, sometimes you come into contact with it not knowing.
Yes, no, exactly, yes. Sometimes it's just one of those, like, see you on the other side, buddy. I guess I'm going to be tripping for this evening. And that's... something you get from Cats, and that's something I feel like you kind of get from Street Trash. This is a movie that does stuff that you've never seen before, and that is something that I think is valuable.
Often with zero context.
Also, often with zero context. Now, that said, I think there are some content advisories and warnings we should throw out there.
Yes,
for
absolutely.
people who are sensitive to this kind of thing. So off the top of my head, the things that I think we need to be worried about are rape, castration, nudity, domestic or partner-related violence, racist caricatures, and necrophilia. Now, is there anything I'm missing that you can think of off the top of your head?
I think you're hitting most of the bases.
I tried to get the biggins. That was my main goal, because this is a very problematic movie.
Tried to get political with Vietnam for a little while, but then it just kind of... died on that hill.
They tried to do a lot with everything they're doing. Now, something that I think is important when we're thinking about what intention with this movie is thinking about Roy Frumsk, the writer-producer, said, "I wrote it to be democratically offensive to every group on the planet. And as a result, the youth market embraced it as a renegade work, and it played midnight shows." So that just kind of gives you an idea of where the filmmakers are coming from here. And I also want to say that I think it's important to mention that this movie was an independent production in the best possible way. listening to the director and the producer talk about making this movie, it had a very summer camp, film school kind of a vibe, a real band of misfit toys coming together to make something. We're talking about borrowed locations, stolen shots, using golf carts as camera cars, lots and lots of students and young people working. According to the one producer, 55 crew members total on this movie, which is not a lot. And 35 of those crew members were film students. Now, most of the crew, the department heads, they were people of experience, but almost all of the rank and file.
Makeup department was definitely made up of people with experience, because that was, I will say, that is a huge takeaway from this movie was, oh my god, these gore effects are gorgeous.
The melts and the cinematography in Street Trash, I think, are the two main things to talk about. And as someone who's come up as an independent filmmaker, I think one of the important things about this movie that people should be talking about is how to take the money that you have, to take the assets at your disposal and to put them into things that are going to make your movie look good. So in this particular case, they spent the time and the money to give the makeup people and the special effects people the money and the time to really make those melts work. The first melt, if I remember correctly from the commentary, said they took 5 days to shoot. And if you know anything about
every day too.
Yes, no, absolutely. But and they built an oversized toilet so that way the actor could fit into that. When they did the severed penis scene, they had 3 separate sizes of penis. So that way they had a giant one for close-ups that are flying around, and then a appropriately sized one for the actors to toss back and forth, and then kind of like an in-between for those scenes where they kind of need to feature it, but not really. But this is the kind of stuff that if you've never made a movie before, you're not going to know that that's where the good money goes.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I would almost say that that's unbelievably fascinating in terms of, I think that's what makes a film like this interesting to watch in the first place, because I don't think you ever hear, hey Jim, how was your first day at props department? Oh, great, I made multiple sizes of dicks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, that's not the answer I expected, but I now need to know why.
I remember my first day as a PA, them being like, okay, find us the best deal on porta potties in Chicago. And I was like, oh, of course we need a place to use the bathroom. There's going to be 30 of us. But nobody talks about that in film school. Nobody talks about that on behind the scenes stuff. They just talk about it well, yeah, we're just going to make a movie and all this stuff is going to happen. And you're like, there's real logistics stuff. Where am I going to use the bathroom?
Rarely does Batman Begins talk about how Christian Bale really couldn't pee in the suit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Had a friend who worked on Batman Begins in Chicago and legit had to knock on doors in an apartment building in Chicago looking for a bathroom for Christian Bale because he had to go now. And they just didn't have time to get him down to the porta potties. So he's just going down the doors being like, hi, can Batman pee here? I'm sorry, I know this is weird. Christian Bale we're making the Batman movie. You might have seen us outside. Sorry for all the inconvenience. Can Christian Bale pee here? He has to go now.
And I think also to sort of veer away a little bit and to give a little bit of context to folks listening to this in terms of how we're trying to frame this podcast. I have only seen the film. That is it. I have not watched reviews of the film, and before watching it, I watched a trailer. That's it. I didn't look up any info. The only thing I maybe possibly knew was the date that it was made, and that was even wrong. But I knew nothing about the cast, the director, anything like that. I leave that up to Ken because he is 10 times smarter than I am in most departments.
I mean, to be fair, I have watched the behind-the-scenes making of both of the commentaries. I've seen the movie 4 or 5 times. I've read several reviews, a couple making of articles. Hi. I'm Ken, and this is my Ken showing. And that's why I'm here on the podcast, and that's why David's here on the podcast, so that way he can respond to these movies like a normal person, and I can respond to these people like the crazy person that I am. Now, also, one of the reasons I think we should talk about this movie is our director, a good man named Jim Muro. Now, Jim has a career that I think we should talk about as filmmakers, especially as filmmakers in COVID-19 times, because holy shit, everything is terrifying right now. We don't know if we're ever going to be going back. Maybe, if we're lucky, there's going to be some sort of independent version of our film making world. It's very likely we're going to see a lot of the big production move internationally. Everything is just going to be different.
It's going to shift. Everything you know is dead or dying.
Exactly.
And will rise from the ashes as something completely different.
So Jim Muro, is born in 1966. 1984, he gets this movie. That makes him 18 years old. Now, Jim doesn't work again after directing this movie.
What?
Until 2013 as a director. He works as a DP in 2003. But what Jim Muro does almost immediately after this is become the go-to Steadicam man in the game. Okay? So, like, literally, here's a list of movies that Jim Muro's worked on. Now, the big thing is after he did this, he was an immediate success. However, he did a couple of small independent films that are pretty big deals. He worked as... let's see here, sorry about this. He worked first and foremost as Steadicam operator on things like Maniac Cop and Brain Damage.
I keep seeing that on Shudder, on Maniac Cop. I keep seeing that.
Maniac Cop is one we should definitely check out. His big breakout is he does Steadicam work on Field of Dreams. And then after Field of Dreams, he does, and this is not in order, but let me give you a list of the murderer's row of this dude's Steadicam work. Are you ready?
Yep.
Dances with Wolves, The Abyss, Point Break, LA Confidential, Casino, True Lies, Heaven and Earth, JFK, Titanic, The Insider, Gone in 60 Seconds, Fast and the Furious, X-Men 3 The Last Stand, X2, Chronicles of Riddick, Terminator 2, Heat, and The Doors. So this dude is the Steadicam man to go to after Garrett Brown for the 90s. And then, to anyone out there who wants to complain about how you're working hard in your 20s and maybe you don't have the big above the line crew job that you want, this man finally gets to DP his first feature film. After directing this movie, mind you, when he was 18, all these years later, 2003, he finally gets to DP Kevin Costner's Open Range. So not only did this dude give him...
Was he just really good friends with Kevin Costner?
He was just a really, really good Steadicam operator. And at a time when there wasn't a lot of them. And then Kevin Costner being the dude that he is, all of those years later, because Open Range, like Field of Dreams is 1989. Okay? Open Range is 2003. So that's like a decade plus later that Kevin Costner was like, actually, I'll tell you what, why don't I give you your fucking break?
Just describe the Open Range poster to me, because I feel like that movie sounds familiar.
Robert Duvall, Kevin Costner.
Is Kevin Costner
really
in an open field
giant,
with a cowboy hat pointing a pistol?
That's pretty much every Kevin Costner poster.
I mean, yeah.
But yes, it is very famous because it's got a really amazing ending giant fight scene to it. And it's one of Robert Duvall's last big hurrahs.
Okay.
But that was his first DP job, which is great. Now, other fun thing about the career of our boy Jim Muro is that he also had a little crossover with a little pedophile and piece of shit named Bryan Singer. Bryan Singer was one of the PAs on Street Trash. All of those years later, when Bryan Singer did X-Men 2, all of that Steadicam work in the mansion with Wolverine, that's Jim Muro. So, as much as I fucking hate the pedophile piece of shit, rapist brain singer, and let's be very clear, he sucks.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
it is,
hands down. Hands down.
It is kind of neat that he brought this dude back all these years later. Now, that said, pedophile and rapist Bryan Singer can go to hell. But just an interesting little fact of film history there.
At the same time, John Wayne Gacy painted.
Yes, no, exactly. Yes, so did Hitler. Crazy. Also, Hitler, the least he could do is he killed Hitler. So we have
At least he liked Germany.
Yes, no, exactly. It's crazy. All right. So,
yeah, I'm not about to defend Hitler on this.
Yes, no, good. Then that's because that would probably be the end of this podcast. We would both be
Day
canceled.
one.
Now, let's see here. Well, David, since we've talked a lot about the making of this movie and a lot of the general details about it, let me ask you, somebody who's never seen Street Trash before, what'd you think about Street Trash?
Well, for one thing, because you gave me I'm trying to remember what the list was that I was choosing from, because we're doing this in a way where Ken picks a collection of movies from the library of Shudder, which is a wonderful service that I highly recommend to everybody. One of them was the post-apocalyptic
Threads.
Yes, Threads was one of them, which I was close to picking that one, but this one, just the trailer grabbed me. The trailer pretty much spoils everything for you.
Yes.
Just about. But still, I'm like, oh, this looks campy as hell, and I eat camp for breakfast. I love campy, and I almost want to say purposefully bad movies. I love those types of. I love that type of cinema. Don't know why. It's just something I gravitate towards sometimes. But actually sitting down and watching it, for some reason, I could only I was able to watch it on Shudder online. I couldn't watch it on Amazon Prime. Mm-hmm. So the quality was a little grainy, but watching it, I had so many questions. For one thing, I don't think it's ever addressed where Viper comes from.
No, it's not. There's just
it's literally just this dude owns a liquor store, and
somehow
he finds a secret door, not really being surprised by it.
Yep, and it's then, full of this booze that melts you, and the end.
Yeah. What? Who made it? Why is it there? Why is it hidden? Why is he only selling it for $1?
There's not
without having tried it.
Street Trash is so horror films are pretty famous for not necessarily being heavy on plot.
No, but they're very straight to the point.
Yeah. And most horror movies are also kind of light on character. It's like, here's the virgin chick, and this dude loves sports. This dude's stupid. Where Street Trash has almost no plot. None.
I think if I had to compare this film to any current film in our time, I would almost compare it to Hobo with a Shotgun.
Okay, I haven't seen that one.
Oh my God! Yeah,
it's on the list.
It's on the list. I highly recommend you check it out. It is, for one thing, just check it out for the lighting. The lighting by itself. That is something that Street Trash didn't have. But the overall...
Oh, no, I disagree there. I would say the cinematography and the lighting in Street Trash is phenomenal.
Well, when they're in the...
It's not showy, but it's really good.
Okay. Yeah, I would almost say that it shows off more when they're in the junkyard.
Yes. I would agree that, yes, when they're in the junkyard, because the trash palace that they're in gives them a chance to show off a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But this film looks for the fact that this movie cost $500,000, it is up there with me with Halloween for best cinematography. So part of the reason, a huge reason that this movie got made with its 18-year-old director was twofold. A, Jim was a Steadicam operator and has a Steadicam, so he was able to bring a Steadicam and do Steadicam stuff. And just the way that they shoot and approach a lot of scenes allowed them to get through pages and pages and pages of dialogue. But in a couple of scenes where normally a 3-page scene would take you 3 to 6 hours to shoot. They were able to shoot that in like 2 hours because they just did it as kind of like a big oneer. The other reason that Jim got this job was because his dad owned the junkyard that the main location was shot in.
Yeah.
And so between the two, it is another great example, again, of a low-budget filmmaker not looking for, not going out there and trying to find a movie that he can make, but finding out what he has access to make a movie. You can say, I want to make a movie on a nuclear submarine.
Speaking of which, where was this shot?
This was all shot in New York.
Oh, I would have
and
almost
New
said
Jersey.
I would have almost guessed Detroit.
Oh no, yeah, New York and New Jersey, Hoboken and around the major boroughs there. Some on Long Island,
Hoboken.
I know. But yeah, in Brooklyn and in the Bronx, and just kind of, I mean, like there was a real summer camp kind of film school vibe to making this movie.
Especially with and once again, like I never bother memorizing character names for anything I watch, even if I'm into it. Like I have to watch it for like 3 seasons before I'm like, oh, that's this character. But the main homeless person, Fred.
Yeah, the one who's dressed like Paddington.
Yeah,
but dark
exactly. Yeah, like homeless Paddington Bear.
Yeah,
I think that is the best way to describe this character. You know, you tend to follow him around the most, and he is interesting. I do often wonder, like, why am I supposed to side with this person? He pretty much fucks his friends over every chance he gets. Even he's super racist towards his one black friend, who for some reason wears a gas mask,
and also
the
just walks
whole time
straight through a plate glass window at one point, and is just fine, like in the most like. Just walks through the plate glass window of a grocery store and just like, wait, what just happened?
At least he put his sweater under his head when he caused him to get
and
the
a bag
shit beaten out.
and a bag on his head.
Oh yeah,
yeah, which I guess protects you, but also I don't think so. But I've never walked through a plate glass window.
I've also never been fully homeless, so
yeah, no, I've never been a houseless person myself. I don't know.
Yeah,
it seems. I mean, so that is one thing about this movie that I think is kind of important is, yes, this movie is pretty much entirely made of houseless persons who...
also, where are all the regular people?
Yes, there's no regular people in this movie whatsoever.
Except the dude in the car with his girlfriend who gets pulled out and murdered. Randomly.
There are the random people who drive to New York who get their cars cleaned by the houseless persons in this movie. And then the closest next normal person in this movie, I believe, is probably Wendy, who works at the junkyard. And basically... She's sassy, but she basically just has basic human compassion for the houseless people who live in the junkyard, who are almost all completely insane. Whether it be
and also rapists.
And also...
Rapists, murderers.
Some yes, some no. So like Freddy doesn't commit any rape, but definitely brings a girl to the junkyard to be
I would argue
raped.
that he commits date rape.
Okay, that's fair. Yes, no,
given that she was intoxicated
yes.
and thought that he was a different person.
Yes. Okay. No. 100%. Let's see here. Then you have Bronson, who is the bad guy of the movie, who is a PTSD riddled Vietnam vet,
Conan Barbarian.
Kind
look-alike.
Yes, kind of person, except with a big beard and then a mostly naked lady he leaves on his lap for most of the movie. And then the only other real... you have Bert, who's the other houseless person, who's African-American, and he's the one who walks through the plate glass window. And then you have Kevin, who is Freddy's brother, who I think is the closest thing to a character that we're supposed to identify, or
we're like you're a good guy. You shouldn't be homeless. You should be a good person. out there
or you're at least better than all these other.
Everyone also keeps calling you a
people.
kid when you're obviously at least in your late 20s.
Yes. Now, from what I understand, they wanted originally to cast like a kid, like somebody like an actual teenager.
But this is street trash.
But there was enough eyebrow-raising material that they decided to go with.
Were you a parent to agree to let your kid be in this?
A 20-year-old
you should probably have your child.
who does some fucked up stuff and looks relatively young.
Favorite character though, by far, Doorman.
Oh, for sure.
Steals the show.
Oh, the Doorman
had me in stitches.
The Doorman
the whole time.
and the dude he talks to are both amazing. The director goes on at length that most of the actors in this movie, he would say a good, if I remember correctly, a good 50% of the actors in this movie are improvising. The other half are not actors and reading every single one of their lines exactly as written because they are not actors. And then they had the doorman and the like the gangstery guy that he talks to at the door, and those two guys were improv dudes, and apparently they just let them roll. They just shot all the film. They just let those dudes. They just
Which
let
I don't
those
blame
girls,
them. They were hilarious.
Yeah, no, and one would like, and especially if you've been on that set shooting short ends, shooting paying attention to every single foot that you shoot, and you get to the middle of the shoot and you've got some times and these guys are killing it. Yeah, man, I get how you just roll out on a couple of cans of film and you're just like, oh, that's right. That's what it's like working with actual money.
So like you know I can't protect you like 100% of the time, right? Yeah, but you got witness protection. No, I don't have witness protection. Oh, well, you know I didn't mean half the things I said to you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, like you don't call cut on Meryl Streep halfway through her take.
No, you do
because you're running low on film. No, you just have the money to be like, well.
I hope that actor is still alive, and at some point he hears you compare him to Meryl Streep.
That would be
height of his career.
That would probably make his career and my day as well. Now, there's one actual actress that I want to talk about real quick because I think she gets done fucking straight dirty in this movie. Now, if there's anything in this movie that is a trigger warning, yeesh, it is the implied rape scene. The rape definitely happens. The woman
barely implied.
Is literally
I think
raped to death. It just doesn't happen on screen.
All it needed was literally a homeless guy being like, "Hey, we're gonna go rape this girl."
Yes. Now, I think it is incredibly fucked up that this movie contains this. I don't approve of it. I think it's fucked up that the character is essentially fridged, which if you're not aware of the term, it refers to a term in comic books with a Green Lantern character, where Hal Jordan's girlfriend is shoved in a fridge and murdered just to motivate Hal Jordan to go and commit some revenge. I believe Hal Jordan could be the other Green Lantern. Anyway, that's not important. It's one of the Green Lanterns. And all you need to know if you want to argue with me about this is both the director on the commentary track says specifically this character is here to advance the plot. She is there to get raped so that way we have a reason for the police to come. On top of it, the character isn't even given a name. Her name is Drunken Wench in the script. And on top of it, it took me a good 4 or 5 minutes of Googling to find out the name of Miriam Zucker, the young lady who put up with all of this. So I just want to say, hi Miriam. I think you're a person. I think you did a great job. You did a great job in this movie, and I'm sorry that you haven't worked more. But it's fucked up that it took me this much work to find out what your name is. So hi, you're a person, and I think you did a lot of really great work in this very problematic movie.
Let me ask. I don't know if you can look this up right now. Like, what year was Return of the Living Dead put out? Because this was just a common thing for horror, like overall for like lower budget horror movies. I mean, and some people would argue that was the reason why horror was kind of a downer genre or a genre that wasn't worth mentioning, was just sort of how it approached women. Many female fans have argued in some ways and empowered them, but this is definitely a dark page in horror. Was this generation of just women exist to either show their breasts or to get raped and die.
So, Return of the Living Dead started production in 1984, and then was released in 1985.
Okay, so around the same time. Like,
yes.
In that movie, there is a woman that literally exists to be on camera the entire movie fully nude. Like, fully nude.
Oh, yeah.
And then just to get murdered while nude. And it is one of those cases where, like, oh, like, I tried to, like, IMDb her. Like, I'm very fascinated to hear, like, to see what else she's been in. I hope more than just this. And I can't find her anywhere. Like, have not been able to find her anywhere. Like, Googled left and right. Not sure. But it's just, you see that a lot for movies like this, where women, unfortunately, movies like this tend to either tank their career or make them think twice about continuing their career.
I would argue that, like, so it's the 1980s. One of the things that thankfully seems to have changed, at least somewhat, in the last several years, is because of the internet. Arbitrary nudity in horror films seems to be dropping.
Yeah. The unrated version was a period of, like, the early 2000s.
Exactly.
That was a big thing.
Or,
that's
like,
no longer...
just putting nudity in just to have nudity.
Yeah.
Where, like, it seems like, no, more now, if you want to get that R rating, it's because you want to get that extra gore in, not necessarily that you want to get that sex scene in. And, I mean, that's, I would say good. And one of the things that has... that I think, as a result, is in the 80s, when that was there was a lot of pressure to try and put nudity, or just get nudity into your movies. And
it was specifically for the shock value.
Yeah, well, it was just specifically, but also so you could put on the back of that box that was going to Blockbuster or Hollywood Video or whatever, that it had nudity in it. As soon as you got that, like, MPA moniker,
all the 13-year-old boys were like, "Oh, I got to find a way to get this home."
Exactly. Even if, like, you were like, "But it's not sexy nudity. It's like fucked up. I don't want to watch it." Yeah, no, exactly. It's the opposite of sexy nudity. That's not what a 14-year-old boy wants. A 14-year-old boy doesn't want uncomfortable rape nudity. They want sexy nudity. And unfortunately, we went through a real fucked up time in the 80s when they just got nudity in however they could, and
whenever they could.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And
it was like I watched my fiance and we watched. I don't know why we decided to watch these two movies back to back, but we watched I Still Know What You Did Last. I Know What You Did Last Summer, and then right after we watched I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, and it is so very obvious in one of the scenes that they try. What's the main actress's name?
Is it Eliza Dushku? No, Jennifer Love Hewitt.
Yeah, Jennifer Love Hewitt. Thank you. The ones that ghosts like to talk to.
Yes.
There is a scene where literally, like you can tell, they literally tried to get her in the most see-through nightie that they could possibly imagine, and it is so very obvious that it's like, this is just specifically so that you can see her semi-naked.
Yes.
And it's just like, this sort of thing pervaded from the 80s all the way up until, early 2000s, and it's just kind of, it's an unfortunate aspect of horror, but, we're trying, I think for this, like, there's a lot to look past for the most part and see the technical aspect of this film. And it's kind of like what you were talking about, the idea of, like, oh, this guy went on to do an amazing career in Steadicam work. But yeah, like this this implied rape scene was definitely the lower point of the film.
Yeah,
for me watching it. And I remember, like, as it was happening, I'm like, I really hope they don't show this on film. I might have to turn it off if that's the case.
Yeah, no. So, like, if it's something that you're really worried about, around the 48-minute mark is where things start off mostly consensual, and then around the 50-minute, 30-second mark, things get rapey, for lack of a better term. So if you want to avoid those things, you want to skip forward to about 51 minutes and 10 seconds. And from about 57 seconds, 50 seconds to 58 seconds, 30 seconds, there's some implied necrophilia that is also pretty gross.
Yeah.
Now, that said, this is not like, say, Showgirls, where, like, the scene, I would say, is absolutely horrific and just interrupts what is otherwise
and
a very fun...
And very pointless.
Well, I would argue that both scenes are very pointless.
Yeah.
But at least in this scene, it's not explicit, and that doesn't make it okay. But that does mean, I think, that you can get away with not having your finger hover over the fast forward or the chapter skip button when watching this scene. It is definitely problematic. If that's something that you have a reaction to, we absolutely encourage you to skip over it. But there are a lot of things in street trash to be attracted to. I think there's a really interesting use of character in writing in the way that, like, as we were saying before, there really isn't a plot. The plot of this movie is basically a guy at a liquor store finds in his basement some liquor that if you drink it will melt you from the insides. And then
and then he sells it for $1,
which
is the idea that it's almost like the idea that it targets homeless people because it's the cheapest liquor there is, and that, like, you know, their life is so crappy that, you know, booze get them by.
Yeah, and then basically there's let's see here. There's Freddie and his brother Kevin. They live in a giant pile of tires, for lack of a better term, in a junkyard. They are friends, in quote, with Bert, who's another houseless person. And then the main bad guy of the junkyard is Bronson, who's a former Vietnam vet who has severe PTSD. And his lady friend, the Wynette, the term that they use. And
they didn't even give her a name.
Nope, no name at all. And then chaos for the rest of the movie.
There are some characters that come in and out of it that, like, what was the guy they throw in the paddy wagon?
Yeah,
with all the prostitutes.
Yeah, then you have Wizzy, who's the homeless houseless person who ends up exploding. Ends up throwing chunks at himself in front of the big graffiti wall. Most of
the cop. There's the cop.
There's the cop,
who actually is a bit more of a major character, even
though he's only in like 2 or 3 scenes, but he's kind of set up like the protagonist. It's a very interesting screenplay. Not to sound too hoity-toity, but like it's got a lot of aspects that are similar to, like, say, a Robert Altman or a Fellini film, where it's much more about how the characters interact together than how they drive forward a cohesive plot full of, like, chunk A leads to plot B, leads to part C, etc., etc. Because
there's not really an arc.
Yeah, like, nobody really changes. Everybody kind of just is who they are at the beginning, and even, like,
until they melt.
Yeah, and even some of the big melts, which is what they refer to in the film when one of the main characters drinks the Viper liquor and melts, for lack of a better term. Some of them don't even get names. One of them is named Black Suit. One of them's just, the Wynette is another one. One of them is just, the best I could find was the actor's named Greg.
Are there any actors in this with actual names?
Yes. No. There's Freddie, who's the one who's dressed like Paddington. There's Bronson. Wendy, who's the woman who works at the junkyard and is generally a human being.
So yeah.
Kevin is Freddie's brother. Bert is the other houseless person. So they do, but most of these characters are there to represent very much like a function in the story, rather than being Mercutio and Romeo and Juliet, where, like, oh no, you can tell me something about Mercutio. You're like, well, he's a bold guy, he's a bully, he's this, he's that, he's Romeo's.
What can you tell me about Bert? He's
we're like Bert. You're like,
he's homeless Paddington's black friend.
Yes, and he steals stuff, and he doesn't take shit from.
Oh, and I completely forgot about the shoplifting scene.
Yeah,
and that was.
And then he, like, gets in the face of the other African American person who's in this movie. Like, there's not a whole lot to say about him. Now, that said, one of the interesting things I found on the commentary track was the screenwriter had mentioned that Bert was originally written as much more of a curt, flippant character. But the actor who played Bert, whose name is Clarzine Jamon.
That's not the name I expected.
He saw the character much more as, like, the Wino's Obi-Wan Kenobi. and brought this big gravitas to the character that, like, both the writer and the director were both like, well, that's not what I was expecting, but okay, cool. Which is, I think, is...
Which I wouldn't necessarily describe as Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan is not...
It's more getting your head around how to play this character.
Yeah.
Like, he's the guy who's got the wisdom, who's been doing this a long time and has something to share.
Oh,
he's the guy who knows when to care, when to not. He's the guy who knows when you can get away with shoplifting, when not to. He's the guy who knows when to challenge the bully and when not.
I'm also genuinely impressed with how much he was able to fit in his pants.
No, absolutely. And I think his character and the way he approached the scene, and the cinematographer approaching the scene, David Sperling, are two of the people that I think is very important to talk about when it comes to this movie, because it goes to show you, when it comes to independent filmmaking, how much one single contributor can change things. This movie looks gorgeous. The fact that it's mostly a step and change away from the characters, most of the stuff is done in wides. There's a really good choice of backgrounds and where and when they can shoot that makes this movie look like it costs 10 times as much as it did. This movie cost $500,000 in 1985, and it looks like it cost like $30 million because they just like knew where to put the camera. And the gore effects were great, and they shot things in wides with Steadicams, so they had more time to light. Because when you shoot things in wides with Steadicams, a one-page scene that you can just shoot as a wide, that you can get through in a half an hour because it's one shot in a wide, saves you so much time, rather than when you cut it up into 5 or 6 shots. It's like a wide, 2 mediums, 2 closes, 2 over the shoulders, and it takes you 7 or 8 hours. And when you don't have any time...
I would also argue that there are some really well done POV shots.
And oneers and big sweeping shots. There's at least one shot where I know where they had the Steadicam and they stood on top of a forklift, and they let the forklift take them down, and then they walked off the forklift with the Steadicam, which is some straight up Touch of Evil stuff of like combining multiple ways of moving the camera. And for a movie that cost this much money, when at this time too, like Steadicam wasn't popular. Like The Shining was 1980. Halloween was 78. This is only 5 or 6 years after those movies, and they are using the Steadicam in almost every single shot. And you can see how much more that gave them in post when it came to coverage and when it came to just making their movie look good. There's a lot of movies from this era that when you look at them in 4K or in HD, look fine. You can really see that they were getting exposure and that like they had the bare minimum equipment to get like what they needed and the images that they needed. This movie is it looks, it's easy. Like it's just clean. It's just, none of the scenes feel lit. None of them feel like the crew is working really, really hard to make sure this shot looks good. Like, no, it just looks like it's daylight outside. But anybody who's made actual movies know that, like, just daylight outside for a whole movie is not easy. Mm-hmm. That's not by accident. You don't get that lucky. You get lucky maybe for a scene or two, but you don't get lucky for a movie.
And it's also one of those things that the audience will never think about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's just like there is a lot of hard work that's being put into the cinematography of this movie, not necessarily to get people to go, oh my God, that cinematography is gorgeous.
It's not 1917 where every shot is like, oh man, look at that. It's still one big shot. Look at the incredible cinematography. Like, no. This is incredible cinematography that also isn't like, you don't need to pay attention to me. It's not, I'm not doing it. Like, I mean, what I'm doing is actually pretty impressive.
It's like CGI that exists just to expand the background of a scene.
Or like CGI just in Jurassic Park, where like it's not, look at me, look at me. It's not, watch this giant T-Rex roll through a giant puddle while 2 other things and a person jumps. Like, it's not calling attention to itself. The whole point is you're like, wait, was that a special effects shot? And you're like, yes! Yeah, it was. Isn't that impressive? That was a whole a whole magic.
That was originally the stunt woman looking up into the camera
Yeah.
like she shouldn't have done, so we had to CG the actress's
Yeah,
face.
that
onto
was just
her.
normally a shot of just nothing happening, and then we made a dinosaur and stuff.
We use special effects to hide mistakes.
Yeah, it's a lot like a Steven Spielberg oneer, where you're not paying attention to the fact that the camera hasn't cut in 4 minutes. You just suddenly realize on the third time you're watching the movie, you're like, wait, well, hold on, no, back up, hold on. When was the last time we cut out of it? Wait, 3.5 minutes?
No, the rehearsals alone.
Yeah, no, exactly. The rehearsals alone. Like, one of my favorite jokes on Twitter was Ryan Johnson talking about how the making of 1917 was just someone sitting in a room with Benedict Cumberbatch for 6 months saying back to one until they finally made it all the way to Benedict Cumberbatch and he finally got to do his scene. And you're like, that's not how they make movies, guys. Because that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. But, if you don't know how movies are made, of course that's what you think making movies are. Because, come on, man. Of course it's not one real shot. Yeah, well, I mean, what are you going to do? Now, let's see here. All right, so, what are the big scenes? Or, what are, is there anything in particular you want to make sure that we talk about here? Because we're going pretty strong. We're 46 minutes here. We're almost
46
up
minutes.
and
Not bad.
Yeah, not bad.
Okay, things to talk about. I guess. Okay, well, I think we talked. I would almost say ad nauseum about the implied rape scene. So I think to sort of balance that out, maybe let's talk about one of the only strong female characters in this movie, and
Wendy.
And so and that's Wendy. So I think maybe
Also person of color, so good for them, especially for the 1980s. The fact that we have multiple people of color in this is a step in the right direction. Definitely a good thing for inclusion.
Yeah, but also in a film that is inherently very ugly in its view of humanity in general.
Yes.
Wendy is one of those few personalities that expresses any form of kindness or empathy or generosity, or literally her boss at one point is very much or constantly sexually harassing her, and she straight up be like hey, fuck you, you don't. I don't think that's something you come across very often in a lot of films of that time, especially horror movies.
Particularly of this era.
Yeah,
yes.
particularly of this era. And so I think it would surmise to toss her into a category of strong female characters that had to deal with the fact that she was written by a male. And so you can tell that the actress who was playing Wendy was somebody who did everything that she could to make this as strong a character as possible, and as as gung-ho and as in your face as possible.
She tried to make her as positive as she could given the materials that she had at her disposal, which I think to me is also one of the...
She saves the male character.
Well, no, absolutely. And it's one of the things that makes... that I think is the mark of a good independent filmmaker, is the ability to take lackluster ingredients and still make a meal out of it. Mm-hmm. Finding a way for the cinematographer to make interesting visuals despite the fact that literally his canvas is a junkyard. Her finding a way to make this character as positive a female representation as possible given what she's asked to do. Characters who are able to take terrible dialogue and just make it work. Because we don't always get given the keys to the kingdom. We don't always get handed a great screenplay as filmmakers. But what makes you a great director is not your ability to tell Meryl Streep that was a great job and tell her on the $500,000 set that she's performing on, just do it again that way. What makes you a director is when that set burns down and Meryl Streep isn't on set that day, and you have the person who's the stand-in for the actor who's supposed to be there because of an illness that day, and you've got that person doing the lines because all hell just broke loose and everything's wrong. That's when you're getting paid to be a director. When you're just telling Meryl Streep, good job, you live in the dream, man. You're getting everything that you ever
Like you've
wanted.
made it by that point.
You were like, not even you've made it, but like your job isn't hard. The hard thing you did was hire Meryl Streep. All you have to do is get out of the way and be thankful. And I think that's something that a lot of people forget, or at least that they lose in the rat race of filmmaking, is that like sometimes your job is to really get in there and get your hands on it, and other times your job is to get out of the way, man. And like you don't need to tell Meryl Streep how to do her job. What you need to do is get out of Meryl Streep's way, because like, come on, man, what are you doing?
Yeah, I think overall, like, I'm glad that I picked this film. I think there was a lot to digest, and I think it was very much its own thing. And it's tough thinking of films to compare it to, which is why like the most recent film I could compare it to was Hobo with a Shotgun, and even that is very much its own thing.
It's very much a film of pieces rather than a film as a whole. It's got a lot of little vignettes. It's a great film that I think is great for like putting on in the background. If you're cooking a meal maybe and you've got Shudder, go ahead, put it on. And like when you look up, you'll probably be interested. And if you get a little bored, you can look away and you can still definitely enjoy things. Do I think you're going to enjoy every single minute of Street Trash? No. Do I think you're going to be glad that you saw it? Yes. Do I think you're going to find pieces that you like better than others? Absolutely. Are there going to be things that you're going to find offensive? Absolutely. And if you're a filmmaker, are there going to be things that you find valuable? 100%. If nothing else, I think you'll find it is a great example, if nothing else, of what it looks like when you have a very talented crew member on a very low-tier film. You have a movie like Street Trash, which isn't going for the gold. It isn't trying to win an Oscar. Yeah. It isn't trying to be prestigious. It isn't trying to be serious. It is literally trying to be, at best, a comedy and at most, a horror film. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that you can't do some absolutely amazing technical work with a film that doesn't have that high of technical
I would say it serves as a showcase.
For definitely for Jim Muro's work as Steadicam, 100%. I'm sure this dude was able to just put this movie on and 20 minutes in. Look at the filmmakers who hired him: James Cameron, Oliver Stone, Martin Scorsese, Michael Mann, Antoine Fuqua, Bryan Singer, rapist and pedophile that he is. Kevin Costner, and these are filmmakers also who went back to him multiple times. So he clearly brought the noise when he worked.
I would also argue that Peter Jackson made Meet the Feebles and Heavenly Creatures. So, early career movies don't necessarily determine the type of work that they're going to do later on in their career.
Somewhere, some guy, when they cast Bryan Cranston as Walter White in Breaking Bad, was like, really? The dentist from Seinfeld? Or the dad from Malcolm in the Middle? And you're like, well, you could also look at the X-Files episode where he plays a white supremacist and he's really, really intense. And maybe he's an actor who has range. But yeah, no, go ahead. Get all snooty and then find out you're wrong. In the same way that like the internet got all mad when Heath Ledger was going to be the Joker because he's just
or the internet got mad at any Batman announcement that was ever made.
Or the internet was super mad that Ben Affleck was going to be the problem with Batman versus Superman, or the internet saying that Daniel Craig was too blonde to be Bond. Like, bro, come on. The internet is never right about this stuff.
Yeah.
The internet
I would argue
Jared
that the
Leto
industry
was
should
a good
almost
choice.
never listen to the internet.
No, don't listen to the internet. The internet thought that Jared Leto was going to be a good Joker and that Ben Affleck was going to be a bad Batman. And if you flip those two, you're accurate, which is not what the internet did. And it's one of those things that you just have to realize that, like when I heard that Heath Ledger was cast as the Joker, I said, wow, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that, but I bet you Christopher Nolan knows more about making movies than I did. And then I waited to see if the movie was good. And then, oh yeah, turns out he won the Oscar for it. Pretty interesting. So yeah, but that's the unusual choices, I think, are often the thing that makes movies, especially lesser known movies, worth checking out, even if they don't necessarily work at every level. The fact that they work on some level makes watching them interesting. And right now, in a world full of COVID and 2020 and everything else going on, in a world where I can't leave my house and I have all of the content in the world that's ever been created, and all I have time to do is check it out, what I'm looking for is either mind-off content or interesting content. And I think Street Trash kind of works either way. I think it works as something that's interesting if you're watching the filmmaking, but it's also a series of weird, crazy, weird little vignettes that you can kind of put on in the background when you're making some food, and I think it also works, which is why I'm suggesting that you check out the movie Street Trash on Shudder, a streaming service that this show, the Shudder Show, is about. David, do you have anything else that you want to add? Before I think we're pretty good here. I think we call it quits here. We're almost at an hour.
Yeah, I think that just about sums up my opinion of this weird and wacky movie. I would say this is one of the types of movies you would find at the annual Music Box Massacre in Chicago.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely. Like, I would not be surprised if you would show this, because they would show movies like Basket Case and May and things like that, and it's just, yeah. I don't regret watching it, which doesn't sound like a stellar review. A stellar review. It sounds like bare minimum, but like it's one of those movies where you're just like, well, that's an image I'm not going to get out of my head. Penis. Also, just now the term penis toss. That is now a phrase in my head.
Penis keep away is the thing that will never leave you. Now, all right. So before we leave, there are two things. So there's two movies that I have suggested next that are both currently on Shudder, and I'm going to suggest them to you. And these are movies that you have not seen, to the best of my knowledge, and so you get a chance to choose them. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause things very, very quickly, travel in time into the future, in which that David has seen both The Reef and the Zombie trailer. And then David's going to choose which movie we watch on the next episode. So I'm going to pause it for just a second here before we travel in time. Okay, so we have traveled in time, and I have now shown David the trailers for both The Reef and Lucio Fulci's Zombie.
Oh, what a time.
Indeed, what a time indeed. Now, something interesting about Zombie. Zombie is a movie where famously a stuntman in zombie makeup is given lead boots and tossed into the ocean and forced to fight a shark. And is very interesting because it is both a sequel to Dawn of the Dead, despite none of the people involved in the movie being involved with Dawn of the Dead in any way, shape, or form.
Or saying, sure, you can make a sequel to our movie?
Yes. So pretty much what happens at the end of Dawn of the Dead is they escape from the mall. They get to a boat. They escape on the boat. And then it's supposed to be, yay, we can get out to the water. And this is that movie. They get on a boat and they end up on an island, and there's a shark that fights a zombie. And like many Italian zombie films, there's not a whole lot of plot. There's a lot of zombies and islands and survivors, and they all interact and stuff happens. But it's not plot heavy again. Much like The Reef is just like what if Open Water was like what if we swam over there, and then the same movie happened. Except there was also just like something happening, as opposed to two married people being mad at each other, which, I don't know. I just really tired of movies where two married or formerly married or soon to be formerly married people get mad at each other for 2 hours.
Just be a happy couple.
You would, or just like, like I'd much rather watch a happy couple work together to try and solve the we're floating in the ocean problem, rather than a couple of people who don't like each other who are just floating randomly in the ocean trying to solve the we're stuck here in the ocean problem together because, well, one can be kind of interesting and cute, and the other one is just two people yelling at each other.
Well, it's good to know that I have two movies to choose from, and they both contain a shark.
Yes. One new, one old.
But one of those movies does not contain a zombie.
This is true. Ooh, is that the way you're leaning?
Oh, it might be the way I'm leaning.
All right.
Because the thing is, I have heard about this scene, and I've forgotten about it for the longest time, and now I'm aware of it again, and now I kind of want to see it.
Have you seen a Lucio Fulci film before?
I've never seen a Lucio.
House of the Cemetery, maybe?
No, I haven't seen that one.
Ooh, well then I am excited for next week when I get to introduce you. I get to pop your Lucio Fulci cherry. That'll be actually good. He's an interesting dude. He's up there with Dario Argento, who's one of the kings of the 70s Italian horror genre. But until next week, David, do you have anything to plug? Twitter or Instagram that you want to share with the people out there?
Let's see. Ever so recently, one of a feature film that I was in 2 years ago, and it's just been released. Serena Waits. It is very independent, revenge horror. So sort of attuned to the theme kind of Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave. The director I worked with, he's one of the producers for LA Horror, and he's very much focused on that kind of campy, independent-looking, almost student-made-esque looking films that is a lot of just kind of like the campy horror that we talk about. So that premiered recently. So I believe we had our premiere on that we streamed on YouTube, but it's going to be on several streaming services when we come back for the next podcast. Once I figure that out, I will let you know. I think it's on Amazon Prime. I'm not quite sure what the other streaming services are, but check Amazon Prime for Serena Waits. Made that with a very, very small crew, and we were able to. Half the challenge was literally shooting a 90-page script in 3 days. So that was the big accomplishment of this film. So, but yeah, feel free to check that out, and yeah, feel free to hit me up at DW Marlowe, where I give my random musings.
Is that on Twitter or Instagram?
Instagram.
All right, awesome. My name is Ken Stachnik. You can check out some of my work as cinematographer on either Toy Box on Hulu or Clowntown, which is on Amazon Prime. If you want to check me out on Twitter or Instagram, my handle is @KenStachnik, STACHNIK. This has been the very first episode of The Shutter Show, the show that's about the stuff that's on Twitter. Internet, I hope you have a great day, a wonderful week, a pleasant month, and I hope you get through this year like the rest of us. And until then,
wash your hands and wear a mask.
Indeed. Have a good night, ladies and gentlemen.